Hello, it's Denise from Women Beyond a Certain Age. We're so lucky. We have a repeat guest, my friend Linda Civitello, who is a food historian and an author and a chef and a teacher and an instructor. But I'm going to tell you something. I've known Linda for a very long time, and I'm so grateful we reconnected recently just on a stream in Facebook. And I said to her, will you come be a guest on Amazon on my, I'm reading on Amazon. That's what, let me just start there. And I'm so grateful we reconnected recently in a stream, probably some radical political stream that we were both answering on Facebook. And I said to her, would you come and be on my podcast? And she said yes. And so, hello, Linda, and welcome.
Hello, Denise. I am so happy to be here. I'm actually happy to be anywhere,
I know.
but I'm especially happy to be here.
Honey, I know. It's been, Linda and I were talking about off microphone a few minutes ago. It's been, Linda, difficult. COVID hit. Not retire, I don't mean you, I'm the one retiring, but just the world has changed so much with COVID. And thank God for Zoom, and thank God for good books that people can read, and thank God for Netflix. That's the other thing that I think. Now, okay, speaking of Netflix, since I'm also, I'm an expert on Bonanza, I'm also an expert on Netflix because I watch so much of it. Your book, what we're going to talk about on today's podcast, last podcast, we talked about your book, Cuisine and Culture, which I never taught a class without having that on the book list for people, because
thank you.
Chefs, I don't care what you're going to be, chefs, food stylists, food writers, people should know about the history of food. It makes them better at their jobs. But today we're going to talk about baking powder wars, the cutthroat food fight that revolutionized cooking. Now, I'm not kidding you, Linda. This is a Netflix movie.
I think so, and I've got the treatment ready.
Okay, then let me tell you something. If I have an agent that can't sell another show that I wrote, but if I tell her I'm going to send my friend this and say this would be a fabulous series,
you know what? Because this is the dirtiest of the Gilded Age dirt.
Okay,
right here in your kitchen.
Now, this is how I'm reading this right off the product description on Amazon. You can buy the book on Amazon. First patented in 1856, baking powder sparked a classic American struggle for business supremacy. For nearly a century, brands battled to win loyal consumers for the new leavening miracle, transforming American commerce and advertising as they touched off a chemical revolution in the world's kitchen. Oh my God!
Well,
that's extraordinary. Now, this is one thing, and then you go. How did you decide to write this book? I mean, how did you know about this? Did you stumble on it? How?
Totalmente accident. I was intending to write a history of breakfast in America, and I'd spoken about that at the Culinary Historians of Southern California, where lectures are recorded. They're on video. You can go on the Culinary Historians website and pull up lectures. I think my lecture, and it was called Let Them Eat Cupcakes, How Dessert Became Breakfast in America. And because that's what's happened. The rest of the world has soup for breakfast. They have vegetables. They have rice. We're eating sugar. We're eating dessert. The difference between a cupcake and a muffin is a cupcake has frosting, a muffin has streusel or a glaze. Anyway, so the history of breakfast, this is a huge topic. I'm thinking, pork, sausage, eggs, milk. I mean, these are massive, massive industries. So I thought, let me start with something small. It'll probably just be a couple of paragraphs. Baking powder's in a lot of the things we eat for breakfast. It's in pancakes, it's in waffles, it's in biscuits, it's in muffins, it's in quick breads. it's, so a couple of paragraphs on baking powder just to kind of get my feet wet, get into the topic. So 10,000 pages later, court cases going up to the United States Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts, state state health departments, governors' proclamations, advertising, just memos, newspaper. This book, just doing the research for this, blew me away at how much the press had changed, because Royal Baking Powder was behind this. And they were losing market share because they were expensive, they were imported. Royal Baking Powder was made out of cream of tartar, which is the dregs of wine processing. So they were importing from Europe. And then here comes this mineral that's mined in the American South, the American West, and it's cheap and it's more potent. So for Royal, you were using twice as much and paying twice as much. So it was like 4 times as expensive.
Okay.
And they're losing market share because people are going, this other stuff works great. I have no problem with it. And Royal decides to start an advertising campaign that says all of its competitors' baking powders are poison.
I read that. I couldn't believe it when I read it.
There's no truth in advertising in the 19th century.
Yeah.
None.
Well, there's not that much truth in advertising in this century, but never mind.
There are some.
Yes, you're right.
Laws in place, but this,
yes.
no, it's misinformation. But so in the 19th century, just you could say whatever, and they got scientists, or they paid scientists, they paid people to say whatever. So you got wars that were between companies that had the same formula, companies with different formulas. You had advertising wars, you had scientific wars, trade wars. You had women getting really passionate about this because you had a new profession. You had home economics. The first meeting of the Home Economics Association was held in 1899 in Lake Placid, New York, and the president was Ellen Swallow Richards. There's a statue of her, or a bust, I'm not sure if it's a full statue, at MIT, where she taught for years. I mean, a woman at MIT. They had to enroll her as a special student.
Okay, this is really probably how did people find out about baking powder?
Advertising.
Okay.
Huge advertising. Okay. And actually, the first time the prototype that something that is a chemical leavener appears, exactly, is in the first American cookbook, published in 1796 in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
So another reason for me to be back here.
Yeah.
In Connecticut. And the author is Amelia Simmons. The cookbook is American Cookery. It's available for free at the Library of Congress, the Michigan State, Cookbook Project. It's available for free online, by facsimile. And she doesn't make a big deal of it. She just says it's called pearl ash, which is a super refined ash that housewives, farm women, you could make. You put a big kettle outside, you cook this down, you refine it, and then you put it in your food. There were women, I say that American women invented cake.
Got it.
In this, because women had to make bread. Okay. This actually all goes to American exceptionalism, which people think means we're number one. It doesn't. When America was founded, they said, we are exceptional. We are different. We are not going to be like Europe. We are not going to be corrupt. We are not going to be that kind of straitjacket where if your father is in the Baker's Guild, you can be in the Baker's Guild, but your next door neighbor can't because his father isn't in the Baker's Guild. Your family does this for generations. It's very tightly controlled. So we're going to be open. We're going to be a meritocracy. We're going to be exceptional. We're going to be different. So we don't have guilds in America in the early times because people who were in a guild in Europe, they had cush jobs. They're not going to pick up and leave unless they're unhappy or something. But so in the United States, well, not the United States yet. So we don't have this lord of the manor who controls the mill and mills the wheat and controls the oven, so that you have to buy, if you're one of the serfs, you have to buy your grain from the lord of the manor. You have to, when you make your dough, you have to take your bread to the oven. You pay him for all of this.
Right, right.
We don't. And then when you get cities, you get guilds and you have a corner bakery. We don't have this in America. When people come here, bread is the mainstay. And it's not like now we say, would you like some bread with that? Then
Yes.
it was, would you like something to eat with that bread?
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Because that was the meal. Sometimes, if you read Jane Eyre, sometimes her dinner is bread and applesauce,
Yes.
the last meal of the day.
Yes.
So bread is the mainstay. People were eating a pound of bread a day. You would bake 30 pounds at a time, 20, 30 pounds. So women have to make their own yeast. They get this, it's a byproduct of brewing beer, and they're making beer out of herbs, out of wintergreen and barks and herbs. They're making beer out of everything. And this is like science fiction. You come here from England, you have a little town, you have a baker, and now you're in America. Your standard of living is higher because you have your own oven, but the responsibilities are massive because you are now expected to make bread every single day, in addition to the main duties of women, having children.
Yeah.
Okay. A dangerous thing. Okay. Baking, cooking, and making clothes for everybody, which is why if you look at colonial American kitchens, there's the hearth, there's the spinning wheel, and there's the cradle. They're all right there.
Got it.
It's like the woman one-man band. You got your foot over here rocking the cradle, you're stirring the kettle with one hand and you're spinning the wheel with the other arm. It's like that guy in the Ed Sullivan Show used to do the 20 plates all at once.
Linda, I bitch about unloading my dishwasher. So I want you to know, I wouldn't allow, and I would never make my own yeast if my life depended on it. If someone was holding a gun to my head, I wouldn't know how to make yeast, nor would I want to know how to make
Well, I mean, you can capture it from the air. This is one of the things we found out right after lockdown started, when people are like, there's no more yeast. It's like you can't run out of yeast. It's everywhere. And this is why San Francisco, your hometown, sourdough is so special, because of the organisms in the air there that gave it its special tang. So anyway, so women have this tremendous burden. And then it's, well, bread is the mainstay. And also they are being told by doctors, by professors, and by the ministers that it's your duty, woman. It is your duty as the mother, as the wife. It is your duty to make good bread for your family. If you fail in this, you failed as a woman. I mean, it is terrible, terrible pressure. And the room for failure is huge. If you're making yeast, because yeast it's a big slurry. It's a big, messy slurry. You see these recipes called for yeast by the pint. Well, how do you keep that when you do make it from, there's no saran wrap. There's no, there's no Tupperware. There's no way to get that sealed. So there are all kinds of instructions how to wash the bottles and then corks, but still things are going to go wrong. And the woman is going to just get nailed for it. So they're looking for shortcuts. Is this not about us? Is this not about America? Are we not in search of the perennial search for shortcut people?
It's true. It's true. We want to do it faster and cheaper and better. That's
right. And easier
and easier.
Foolproof. Right. Yeah. And it's not just that we want to. We firmly believe as Americans that there's a better way to do whatever it is.
That's true.
Anything can be improved upon. So here comes this powder that's made from ash. And it's things like lye lutefisk, which means lye fish, LYE. This is a caustic substance.
Got
So
it.
you read in some of the cookbooks, it's like you need to get whatever it is in the oven immediately when you put the pearl ash in it. Don't turn your back on it. Get it in the oven because it'll start to rise immediately. And whatever happens, don't let it spill on the floor because it'll strip the paint off the
Oh, for
floorboards.
God's sakes. Got it.
Yeah, yeah. So, you look at this as a chemical leavener. There are a couple of things I just want to say from the book. I start the book by saying business is war, cooking is chemistry, food is political.
Absolutely.
And that's what the baking powder wars are about, is, all of these wars. But so here comes this chemical powder, and Amelia Simmons mentions it. And very casually, she doesn't say, "Oh, I found this fantastic new thing. And ladies, here,
Yeah.
you need to know." It's just add some pearl ash here, pearl ash there, which means it's been in use. That where she is, this is what women are doing
Got
when
it.
they bake. In England, they're like, what? What? You look at the British press and they're like, what is this? What is this they're talking about? This is fantastic. So then men start to get involved. And eventually by 1856, we get the first patent. And it's a Harvard professor of chemistry
Ah,
who
okay.
patents it. And I think he wrote a treatise about bread. And his recipe is for a quick bread. It's a baking powder bread,
Got
which we
it.
now call quick breads. All of
Yes.
those banana bread,
Yep.
big specialty during lockdown. Everybody's eating banana bread, right? Comfort food, cranberry, orange bread. All of these quick breads are baking powder breads.
Got it.
That's it. So baking powder starts to catch on, and then you do have to instruct women on how to use this. This is new technology.
Sure. Sure.
And you see the change. Some places in the Midwest, it caught on very quickly. Midwestern cakes, especially. So, do you want to eat bread that you baked 5 or 6 or 7 days ago and made with yeast that maybe has some problems? Or do you want muffins or biscuits that you made 20 minutes ago?
Yeah.
Or how about cake? So
Yes.
cake becomes the new food for social events. And you see, by the 1830s and 40s, you see cookbook writers like Sarah Josepha Hale saying, warning women, young women are ruining their health and their lives by going out and, they're staying out late, but they're eating cake. Cake should not be, cake should not be the main meal. So in the 1880s, you see cookbooks they're like translations. We have a dual language cookbook where you have the Italian on the left and the English
Yes.
on the right. Well, these are dual cooking texts. So you'll have the recipe, the original recipe made with yeast or beaten. The other way you leavened
Yeah.
cake was you beat it. And some of these recipes say beat for an hour.
Yeah.
So what are you beating it with? You got a nice whisk? No,
Yeah.
tree branch,
Yeah.
and it says like, have a male servant do this. Well, I am so sorry, but I replaced mine and I can't find him. Um, you know, so here comes baking powder.
Got
And
it.
it's just, so you have the recipe, the original recipe for either beat this for an hour or use this much yeast. And then right below it, the exact same food, but with baking powder.
Got it.
And then also the baking powder companies go on massive advertising campaigns. I knew the word gutter snipe as meaning a kind of a vicious person. I didn't
Yeah.
know it was a real thing until I started doing baking powder wars, because they would paint things on the gutter so that if you were on the curb there, if you were waiting to cross the street, you'd be staring at an ad.
Yeah.
You'd be
I
staring at
never knew that.
advertising.
I
Right.
have.
And on subway stairs, on the
Yeah.
risers, so as you're going up the stairs, your eyes are always looking up and ahead. You're reading an advertisement. I mean, and then plus baking pans, spoons,
Sure.
contests, all kinds of things, But one of the big issues here is because now it's like, we're trying to get chemicals out of food. And I kind of fell in love with these women who were looking so hard for shortcuts. At one point, they're trying smelling salts in their
Wow.
baked, their wheat and baked goods. And I guess they figure, if I can get you up off the floor when you're passed out, I ought to be able to get that flour right up there. But now it reminded me of, because you remember, was it a couple of weeks ago, everybody was doing NyQuil chicken?
Yes, I heard it. I don't
Right.
know about it, but I heard about it.
Because
Yes.
we don't usually go to our medicine cabinet when we're making muffins or
Yes.
bread or something, or food when we're cooking. But these women, I just want to say, these autonomous American women who had educated themselves and learned how to cook with corn and other strange flora and fauna. Corn was unknown in Europe.
Yeah.
Corn is
Yeah.
native to the Americans, and they've got cornmeal. And yeast doesn't do jack to cornmeal because it is gluten-free.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So these women had educated themselves, learned how to cook, and who experimented with leaveners that could strip paint off floorboards. They were not risk averse. They were outspoken about their food, religion, education, and political issues. They were concerned with morality, healthy eating, and care of their families. Yet not one of these writers, these cookbook writers, raised her voice in protest against the pearl ash, sal volatile, which is smelling salts, or any other chemical additive.
Mm.
So why not? Because these were a boon. These were a huge help to these women, these chemical leaveners. They were convenient, inexpensive, and they were regarded as healthier than yeast. So American housewife consumers did not want local, state, or federal governments to label, regulate, or remove chemical leaveners. They wanted better chemical leaveners. So this is the problem early on, is that they don't work optimally. And if you don't stir them in properly, or sometimes you'll still see recipes that call for baking soda to be dissolved in milk or in water.
I've read that. I've read
That's
that
a holdover.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a holdover.
Now, so who was so what happened? So all of a sudden, so somebody someone got a patent, but then companies all of a sudden said there's money here and let's package it up and market it.
Yeah, the formula was very easy. You had baking soda, which is a mineral, which Arm & Hammer started commercially in the 1840s.
Got it.
Then you had a buffer, which was cornstarch, which now everybody's like, yeah, cornstarch. Yeah. Back then, that was cutting edge technology.
Got it.
It was a new product. So you have baking soda, a cornstarch buffer, and then you have an acid. You have a second leavening agent. So, except for cream of tartar, which was the royal baking powder, the byproduct of winemaking, which you just combined with baking soda. And even now, you'll still see recipes that call for cream of tartar and baking soda, when all it is baking powder. That recipe is 100 years old.
Yeah.
And, people are like, oh, I don't have cream of tartar. It's like, you got baking powder, I bet. More people have baking powder in their cabinets than cream of tartar.
Yes.
So
they make in the synopsis of your book on Amazon, they talked about and because you had said food's political, and see, I say this to people all the time, Linda, and people go, what do you mean? I said, how can it not be political? We fight wars over food. We fight the wars over the land that produced the food. What are you talking about? Yeah. Food is political. Look at our political system today in our food chain.
Right. And lack of food causes revolutions. The French Revolution and bread, the Russian
But how
Revolution.
did it get into? So were there lawsuits and politicians bought off, and was there total corruption?
Yes. In
That's
fact,
what I thought.
Denise. I mean, unbelievable. It was so huge. People were blown away by it. They said, this is like the biggest advertising scheme. It's like up there with or down there with Rockefeller, and Standard Oil was how big
Gotcha.
it was. So Royal Baking Powder continues to lose market share. And at one point, there were over 500 baking powder companies in the United States, because
Wow.
anybody who had a little grocery store or little stand in the middle of anywhere could get, because the railroads reached everywhere. You could get cans or bottles, you could get labels, you could get the baking soda, you could get the cornstarch, and sodium aluminum phosphate or sodium aluminum sulfate. You could get this other leavening agent, and then just combine them.
And
And
people
there
were
were,
making their own.
yeah, there
Small
were
companies were
formulas
making
all
their
over
own.
the place. Yeah, so you've got, these brands, like I said, over 500, and they're all with this new technology, and they're cheaper than Royal. They're more effective. They're more potent. And Royal baking powder is this is where they go after them. And you see headlines in newspapers above the fold, because this is in what we would call advertainment or something. It's not news, but it was presented as hard news. Royal
Got it.
Baking Powder had contracts with thousands of newspapers. And this was a time when the country was driven by newspapers,
Got
when
it.
this is how you got your news, was your little town had a newspaper. And here above the fold is it malaria or is it baking powder?
Oh my God.
This
So a
family
smear
was,
campaign. A smear
yeah,
campaign.
this family was reportedly taken ill, and the physician said they had just consumed biscuits made with X brand baking powder.
Oh
And
my
now,
God.
and the doctor goes, I was there because the guy cut his hand, while he was milking, or something. And the family writes to the newspaper. The doctor writes to the newspaper, and the newspaper goes, I'm so sorry, we can't do anything. We have a contract with this company, with Royal Baking Powder, that says that once we print a story about them, we cannot retract it, and we cannot print comments about it from anybody, including the people involved.
Got it. As much as things have changed, it doesn't sound all that different, Linda, from smear campaigns in today's.
On the internet.
You know what I mean? It's the same thing. We just don't have the newspapers anymore.
Right.
What do you think? You must have been, I would have been, I'm floored listening to you. I'm floored because I've read part of the book on Amazon, gave me some free pages. When you went to sell it, Linda, to sell the book, were people just shocked? I would have thought that, did people read this and just say, I had no idea? Because that's what I would have said.
Yeah, it was even people in the Midwest where a lot of it happened. It's because it's University of Illinois Press. Because the biggest thing that happened finally is in a last ditch effort, Royal just went and flat out bribed the state Senate in Missouri. And they bribed the state Senate to pass a law declaring that all other baking powders except Royal were poison, and they got removed from the shelves. So, it's like, the way people found out about it, you're a grocer in a little town,
Yeah.
you have your little mom and pop store. It's like, in the middle of the night, you're sleeping. It's like, hello, police, we're arresting you for selling X brand baking powder.
Thugs.
And is there a WTF department somewhere? And then you got court cases, and finally, but people were getting wise, and you see memos in the Department of Agriculture warning people, whatever you do not get involved in this. This is a trade war. And as new public federal agencies got created, they started pulling them in. So you'll get the Department of Agriculture, the Bureau of Chemistry, then the Federal Trade Commission, because it's like, they're false advertising against me because Royal was saying that these other baking powders were made with old forks and spoons. They were made with aluminum.
Oh my God.
Ground up old utensils.
Yes.
And of course, as we know now, people will believe anything.
Yes. Now I'm going to tell you something. I cannot thank you enough for this. I hope that people listening to us, when they go to get their baking powder out of their cabinet, because we've got lots of bakers that listen to us, that they will think, oh my God. And thank you for your research, and read it. Now I'm going to tell you something, Linda, again. And all Linda's books are on Amazon.com. Like you said, with the Southern California historians, of which I'm still a member, they've been doing live ones again because they could, but I think they do have a library of when people have spoken before.
Yes.
So that so that people could go and listen to you speak on one or two of these subjects. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And I want to thank you for your time again. I know you're busy, and for you to take so much time out of your day-to-day to talk to us, I appreciate it so much. Now, what's the last word we want to say about baking powder? I don't even know what brand of baking. I think I buy Clabber Girl. Isn't that one of the originals?
Yeah, Clabber Girl is not known very much in the East Coast, because it was Rumford that started out here. The Harvard professor started Rumford. Then you got Davis in New Jersey. Clabber Girl came out of Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana.
Wow.
German immigrant family, German Catholic immigrant family, which is in the 1920s where I get into the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana, because they hated immigrants and they hated Catholics. And they marched down the street right in front of the Clabber Girl offices and the factory and the businesses. It was, in full regalia. But Clabber Girl, kind of the punchline to this whole thing, the money from Clabber Girl baking powder financed the Indy 500.
Oh my God.
This is why, if you look there, there were always signs of Clabber Girl when the cars were driving around. I mean, I can see it because I know to look for it.
Sure.
Clabber Girl was sold. It was a family-owned business until the last 4 or 5 years.
Oh my God.
But in the 1940s, the last chapter is about this, is about the owner of Clabber Girl deciding to buy this old broken down racetrack. And everybody said, you're going to lose all the money you made on baking powder. You're going to lose the family fortune on this ramshackle, broken down. It's a tear down. What are you doing? It's made out of bricks. And of course, it's the brickyard is what the Indy 500 is known as. I mean, they have some of the bricks are still there, but it was started by Louis Chevrolet and others, and then fell into disrepair during the Depression and World War II. So he revived it again after World War II, but everybody was sure he was out of his mind. But you see this entrepreneurial spirit where, you've had this too, I'm sure. Everybody, where, everybody tells you, oh, what are you doing? Are you out of your, you're going to just fall on your face here. And it's like, not going to happen. I trust myself.
Linda, thank you so much. If people, when we broadcast Linda's podcast, we put information up. Cindy puts everything up on our Facebook page, Women Beyond a Certain Age. So please, people, when you want to know more about Linda, you can go to the links we supply, and also Amazon. So Linda, thank you again. Cindy, thank you for everything you do and keeping the train on the tracks. My head is spinning from thinking about the corruption who knew in baking powder? Who knew that innocuous little can you have in your cupboard? And by the way, I'm not sure I've ever used baking powder when it wasn't out of date and it still worked. So I'm thank you very much, because I don't buy it very often. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.